Many have used the language of self as an identifier of the ego. For our conversation, let's understand ego as a more of a psychological term and self as more of a metaphysical term. Let me concede that these two terms are often used interchangeably. Now, I have already identified ego as the mind state with its history and narratives with which we self-identify. Now, self might be seen as that which is conscious existence to which my ego attaches. Perhaps the self is the awareness that there is an I, and if there is an I, then there is not just a me, but there also must be a you. But that is all psycho-philosophical jargon. Now, in my humble opinion, the reality is that no one really knows what any of these things are for which we use these terms. Ego and self are relatively agreed upon terms that we use to talk about something that we cannot measure objectively. Ego and self are terms that acknowledge that I exist. Now, in Sufi psychology, the self is known as the nafs. The word nafs is an Arabic word that can mean either ego, the psyche, the self, or even the soul, and is an aspect of our psyche that we need to understand, especially in terms of understanding my true self and the self I want to be or the self I want to become. Hazrati Maulana's great work, the Masnavi, focuses on the nafs, especially in the first volume, and some would argue also in the second volume. In that first volume, from one of the stories that we have been learning in our weekly online class, The Journey Through the Masnavi, is in the story of the second Padishah. Hazrati Maulana writes, "The mother of idols is the idol of your nafs, because that idol is a snake, and this idol is a dragon. The nafs is iron and stone, and the idol is the sparks, and those sparks settle down from the water. How should stone and iron be quieted down from water? How should a person with both of these be sure? The idol is the black water, that is the black slime that is hidden in a jug. Know that the nafs is a fountain of black water, is a fountain of black slime. That hand-carved idol is like the black floodwater. The idol maker, nafs, is a fountain on the waterway. A single piece of stone breaks 100 jugs, but the fountain is gushing water without pause. Idol breaking is easy, very easy. To think that it is easy to see the nafs is ignorance. Ignorance. Jahl ast, jahl, he says. This is an incredibly powerful statement about the nafs, about ourself, about our ego that dwells inside of us. Again, Jalaluddin Rumi offers in another of his robais, he says, Yek lahze agar nafse to mahkum shavad, ilmi hame anbiyat ma'lum shavad. آن صورت غیبی که جهان طالب اوست در آینه فهم تو مفهوم شود. If for one moment you would find your nafs guilty, the knowledge of all the prophets would become known to you. In the mirror of your understanding, that hidden face which the world is seeking would become understandable. In Surah Yusuf, the 12th surah of the Quran, in the story of Zulaykha's attempted seduction of Hazreti Yusuf, when Zulaykha confesses, she states, وَمَا أُبَارِئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَى مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي إِنَّ رَبِّي غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And I do not absolve my nafs. Indeed, the nafs is the commander of evil, unless my Lord bestows his mercy. Indeed, my Lord is always forgiving, most merciful. Inna Rabbi Ghafuru Rahim. So, this is the picture that is painted of our nafs. A snake, a dragon, a fountain of black slime, and that which commands us to do bad. And if the nafs is self, ego, psyche, soul, then at our most foundational level, we have a voice in us that is leading us or misleading us into negative, self-serving, and self-centered behaviors, which many of us understand to be the root of all of our problems. And I might offer that since Hazreti Maulana devotes the first 4,000 bait, that is the first 4,000 verses of his Masnavi to the nafs, he must think that it is very important to address this topic first. Many others, including myself, speak of this part of ourself as lower or base. It is that part of ourself that is both self-seeking and self-preserving. It is the part of ourself that wants to eat, wants to drink, wants to reproduce, wants to stay alive. These desires may simply be a necessary and highly functioning remnant of our primitive or so-called reptilian brain and our brain-based biological responses to the challenges of life and existence and the preservation of our species. No matter, this response or remnant does exist, and religious types and mystics, including our teacher, Hazreti Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, have created a language to speak about it and the potential for higher brain functioning responses long before there was a neuroscience to talk about these processes. For instance, even Judaism talks about a hierarchy of either 3 or 5 levels of the soul, the lowest part being the nefesh. Now, you can probably already hear the similarity to the Arabic word we just used, that is, the nafs. Judaism also talks about a bipartite soul that contains both an animal part, the nefesh behemit, and a divine part, the nefesh elokit. In Islam, there is an understanding of 7 levels of the nafs, which is similar to Judaism's 5 levels of the soul. The goal of both systems is to recognize the selfishness and self-centered nature of the ego and to map out a path to higher levels of being and ultimately a more and more altruistic way of relating to others in the world. In both of these systems, there is a desire to diminish, if not annihilate, the responses and actions of the so-called lower part of the self or soul. In a future video, I hope to talk about the levels of the soul in both systems more specifically, inshallah. Interestingly enough, Hazreti Maulana warns us in the Masnavi in that section we already covered. He said, Bot shakastan sakh bashad nik sakh. Sakh didan nafs ra jak last jak. Surate nafs arabejui e pasar. Qaseya duzach bechvan bahaft dar. Idol breaking is easy, very easy. Remember this part? To think that it is easy to see the nafs is ignorance. Ignorance. But then he continues, O son, if you are seeking the form of the nafs, read the story of hell with 7 gates. Here, Hazreti Maulana is referring to the Quran. In Surah Al-Hijr, he says, وَإِنَّ جَهَنَّمَ لَمَوْعِدُهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ لَهَا سَبْعَةُ أَبْوَابٍ لِكُلِّ بَابٍ مِّنْهُمْ جُزْءٌ مَقْسُومٌ. And surely hell, Jahannam, is their destined place altogether. It has 7 gates. To each, a group of them is designated. So here are these 7 gates as they are understood by many and each of their sources from the Quran. It is also taught that the lowest, that is, the most primitive nafs, has 7 characteristics that must be overcome. Pride or arrogance, greed, envy, lust, slander, stinginess, hatred. It is interesting to note that the late Kenan Rafai writes, "Tıpkı bunun gibi nefsinde 7 kapısı vardır. Bunlar dünya sevgisi, gazap, şehvet, yalnız kendi nefsini düşünme, kibir, haset ve riya kapılarıdır." Just like this, the soul, the nafs, has 7 gates. These are the gates of love for the world, wrath or rage, lust, thinking only of oneself, arrogance, envy, and hypocrisy. It is also interesting to note that Hasidic Judaism teaches that there are 7 gates to the soul, that is, 7 gates to the nefesh. These are 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 1 mouth, and that each of these gates has a gatekeeper to guard against or to stop that which goes in and that which goes out. Again, Hazrati Maulana writes in the first daftar of his Masnavi, "Man halake fe'lo makre mardomam, man gazide zakhm maro kashdomam, mardom nafs az darunam dar kamin, az hame mardom batar dar makrokin." I am ruined from the deeds and tricks of people. I am smarting from the wound of the snake and the scorpion. Worse than all people in trickery and animosity is the nafs man, the mardome nafs that is within me, lying in wait. And this is how Hazrati Maulana depicts the nafs in the 3rd daftar, in book 3 of the Masnavi. He says, "Nafs ra tasbih moshaf dar yamin, khanjar o shamshir andar astin, moshaf o saluse u bavar makon, khish ba u hamsar o hamsar makon, suye khozat avarad bakr vozu, vandar andazad tora dar kar u. عقل نورانی و نیکو طالب است، نفس ظلمانی بر او چون غالب است، زانک او در خانه عقل تو غریب، بر در خود سگ بود شیر مهیب. The nafs has a tasbih and a Quran in the right hand, in its sleeve, a dagger and a sword. Don't believe it's Quran and hypocrisy. Don't make yourself a confidant and a companion with it. It will bring you to the pond for the sake of wudu, for the sake of ablutions, and it will throw you into its bottom. The intellect, the akla, is sparkling and a seeker of good. So how does the dark nafs prevail over it? Because it, the nafs, is at home. Your intellect is a stranger. The dog, the sag, that is the nafs at his own door, is a formidable lion.